Yo, 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 welcome to 2026 this morning. So, who's the US going to play in the World Cup? I know you want to know. I do. It's only August, but some things we already know about the draw. There's a bunch of things we can be pretty sure about, and there's a number of things still totally up in the air. So, let's take a closer look at them today and see who could the US play in World Cup 2026. First off, let's establish the basics, what we need to know about the draw in general. Great news, the US is already in because they're the hosts. Woohoo. And the real good news is the US is in pot 1. That's reserved for the best teams, not us, and the hosts, that's us. Boop. The World Cup draw is basically set up into 4 pots based on FIFA rankings, with the best teams in pot 1, the next best in pot 2, the next best in pot 3, and the worst in pot 4. FIFA said they would go this route again, which makes sense with all the expanded teams. For a number of World Cups, the pots were just pot 1, the hosts and the best teams, and the other pots were based on confederation or geography. So the US was often in the same pot as CONCACAF teams and Asian teams or African teams, and it made the draw a bit tougher for the US because a lot of the teams that they could have played that were worse than them were in the same pot as them. So now it's easier just based on rankings. 2026, with the expanded field, we'll have 4 pots of 12 teams each. It used to only be 8, now we're up to 12 teams in each pot. So with 3 hosts, we know the US will avoid the top 9 teams in the world. That's great. This is probably the most favorable draw the US will get ever, or at least since 1994, and it'll be tough to get that going into the future unless we somehow become a really, really good team, like a top 10 team in the world. We do know Mexico are the seeded team in Group A, Canada the seeded team in Group B, and the US are the seeded team in Group D. That doesn't really matter for what teams we'll get, but on the actual draw day, we'll know a little bit more about the US options based on what happens to Mexico and Canada ahead of them. One caveat about the pots being based on FIFA ranking, there are still some playoffs, so teams that won't be decided until after the draw. This is what happened with the US group in 2022. Remember, we drew UEFA playoff 3 or whatever it was, and that eventually turned into Wales. But at the time of the draw, we didn't know who we would play, and that certainly could happen again. So the playoff spots, there's 4 UEFA playoffs, 2 intercontinental playoffs. Those won't happen until March. And all these playoff spots will end up in pot 4. So it's possible that there'll be some pretty decent teams, especially in UEFA, that may have been based on FIFA ranking in pot 2 or 3, but they will be in pot 4. Theoretically, England and France and Spain could end up in pot 4. That's highly, highly unlikely, but still possible. So like I said, the playoffs will prevent us from having full knowledge for the draw, and thus we don't really have full knowledge now, and we don't even know who a lot of the teams will be. But there are many things we can know. A few other things we don't know, and as we sort of look at who the US will play, these things are important. So the things we don't know, lots of them are because this is FIFA, and FIFA does what FIFA wants and doesn't really give people much say or much lead time, and that's based on money, money, money. So we don't actually know the constraints of the draw. We don't know how European teams will be drawn. Will it be just once a group has 2 European teams, they can't get any more? But with the 4 UEFA playoff teams in pot 4, that's probably not how they'll do it. So they could say all European teams in pot 1 cannot draw a European team in pot 2. They could say all the non-European teams in pot 1 must draw a European team in pot 2. That seems a distinct possibility, especially if the pots remain how they're drawn up now, with 5 non-European teams in pot 1 and 5 European teams in pot 2. This will make more sense when I show you the pots, but also that would make sense because then pot 4 really could go anywhere. You wouldn't have to worry about a group having 3 European teams, which I presume will be a no-no. Generally, The rule is for all other confederations, you can't be drawn with a team from your same confederation. So with the expanded teams, there's still, because there's more groups, that isn't in danger. So there could be 10 African teams, but there's 12 groups, so you can still keep those rules. For Europe, 16 European teams, 12 groups. So we'll have at least, I would think, 4 groups with 2 European teams, and the rest of them with just 1. That's what logic says, but again, FIFA is going to be FIFA, so you're never totally sure. Also, they haven't stipulated the rules for the intercontinental playoffs and the draw. Will there be rules? Probably again. So there's there'll be 3 teams in each mini intercontinental playoff. So one of those 3 teams will make the World Cup. So 2 of the 6 teams making the playoff will make the World Cup. And those playoffs could have an Asian team, an African team, a CONCACAF team. Does that mean that then those confederations can't draw the intercontinental playoff spots? Likely, but we don't know. And then another question directly related to the U.S. would be, there are 2 CONCACAF spots in the intercontinental playoff. So will they make sure that both CONCACAF teams are in the same mini playoff so that we can't have 2 more CONCACAF teams? Or will they really just go based off FIFA ranking and let it fall where it may? I don't know that. It would help the U.S. because potentially if those CONCACAF teams are in different groups, that would again be 2 more spots in pot 4 the U.S. could not draw instead of just 1. So we'll see. So enough of that. Let's take a look at the pots, and this is all conjecture except for a few things in bold. Bold are the teams that have made the World Cup that we know, but we don't always know exactly what pot they'll be in. So let's take a look at the possibilities of pot allocation, configuration, makeup. This, of course, can change, but let's look at where they are now based on the results. And what I'm going to do is also base it off historical performance. Most things will remain the same for these pots. A few will certainly change based on what teams qualify. And some of these positions may change as well. Got it? So this is just where we stand now based on what it would look like if we use FIFA rankings, if we use assumptions of the best teams making the World Cup, if we use assumptions of the historical performance of teams. And then let's take a look at the pots themselves. So pot 1, probably our most certain. Obviously, Mexico, Canada, US, all good. It would be highly, highly improbable for multiple of these teams to move out of the top FIFA rankings and still qualify automatically for the World Cup. So looking at someone like Portugal, it would be very tough for them to win their group and fall into pot 2 based on FIFA ranking. That's not going to happen due to the fact that there are so few FIFA matches remaining, and FIFA rankings are based heavily on historical performance and overall results rather than just recent performance. Losing multiple matches would have a more adverse effect on qualification over ranking. So who will be in pot 1? Certainly Mexico, Canada, USA as hosts. Certainly Argentina, as they've already qualified and have the top FIFA rank. Almost certainly Brazil with their qualification already and high rank. And then we get to the highly likely European teams. These are European teams with the highest FIFA ranking that are very likely to make their World Cup and win the group. Let's put it this way, it would be a huge surprise if one of these teams did not win their group. It would be almost unthinkable if multiple of these teams did not win their group. France, Spain, England, Portugal, Netherlands, Belgium, Germany. So again, with more teams qualifying, there are more groups also in Europe. So it should be easier then for these best teams to qualify. And even if 1 or 2 of these teams were to fall out of pot 1, again, by not winning their group, it wouldn't really change much based on pot 1, because if we look at the pot 2, those top 2 teams are also European teams. One of these teams or two of these teams from pot one not qualifying would have a big impact on the other groups, but not so the first group. So say Portugal ends up second in their qualification group, then they will not only not be in pot one, but if they finish second in their group, they are a very dangerous potential team in pot four. Basically, all the other pot one teams want the favorites to win, so there are not huge teams in pot four. Or maybe that's just my U.S. perspective, and France and England are good enough that they don't really care who else makes it, and maybe, if Portugal is in the playoff, they won't make it also. But that's just my perspective. All right, moving on to pot two, definitely more uncertainty here. Teams at the top of this pot could move to pot one. Teams at the bottom of this pot could potentially move to pot three. And for the teams not yet qualified, they're not as strong as pot one, so they may be less likely to qualify automatically, aka for Europe and Africa, win their groups. So let's take a look at the potential teams in pot two. We'll go a bit out of order this time. So we have Japan already qualified. Based on FIFA rankings, they're in the middle of this pot, so unlikely to have enough teams ahead of them move, and enough teams ahead of them not qualify to move to pot one. Iran already qualified, even more improbable to move up. South Korea, bottom of pot two, but with no more competitive games, no real reason to lose ground and move backwards out of pot two into pot three. Then there are the South American teams. Uruguay, not officially in, but they'll make it. They have 2 games, and I think they only need 1 point, maybe even 0 if a few other results go certain ways. So Uruguay, we'll call them in. Colombia, there's an outside chance they could fall to the Intercontinental Playoff, but again, I'm calling them in. There's a very good team. I don't see them faltering in their final 2 games. Then we have the European teams. Let's see. Austria already beat Romania, still have 2 matches against Bosnia as their biggest competition. Denmark, they're in a group with Greece, Scotland, and Belarus, so no gimmies there. They haven't even played a game yet because of the Nations League. I don't know enough about FIFA to hazard a guess of what happens if teams like this were to win their group in a very competitive fashion, meaning they lose and draw multiple games but still win their group. They could potentially move down to pot 3, but probably not. Switzerland is in a qualification group with Sweden and Slovenia, so really up for grabs there with Switzerland as the favorites. And at the top, we have Croatia, who's already beat Czech Republic easily, their biggest competition in their group. At the top of pot 2, they would be the first team to move if anyone ahead of them falters. Then we have the African teams, Morocco and Senegal. Morocco is clear ahead of their group, 4 games to play left in Africa. With competitive fixtures remaining, I consider Morocco probably the last team in pot 2 that could potentially move up to pot 1. Senegal, they do currently sit second in their group with the Democratic Republic of Congo in first, but their remaining games are slightly easier, even though they have an away match in Kinshasa. I do think Senegal will still qualify. And you may have noticed I've left out Italy. So to many, Italy are the least likely to remain in pot 2 because they are currently not winning their qualification group. In fact, they lost 3-0 to Norway, who's in first place. But with so many games still to play, including Italy-Norway in Italy, I cannot knock them out just yet. I need to see it first. Mostly I need to see it from Norway, who haven't qualified for anything in quite some time. And even with good players like Holland and Odegaard have been known to choke over the last few qualification cycles. So we'll keep Italy in there for now. If Norway make it, their ranking will place them in pot 2. So move everyone else. Their ranking will place them in pot 3. So everyone ahead of them will move up to the spots because Italy has vacated their spot. All right, pot 3 is the pot we're least certain about because teams can move up, and a lot of these teams still have ways to go in qualification. Pot 4 we know a bit more because it's just going to be the teams with the worst FIFA rankings and the playoff spots. So starting at the top, Australia already qualified, could easily move to pot 2. Ecuador already qualified, need 2 teams ahead of them to miss out to move to pot 2. If things stay where they are, Ecuador would be the team I would most want to avoid in pot 3. Panama has the easiest CONCACAF group. Egypt and Algeria are both looking good for first place and in line to qualify. Costa Rica has a tougher group with Honduras in their group, but are still favorites. Paraguay, very, very likely to qualify. I think they just need 1 point in their final 2 games, and they'll stick in pot 3 most likely. Nigeria, this one's even less likely than Italy. Nigeria is currently in 4th place in their 6-team group, 6 points behind first place South Africa. So unlike Italy, Nigeria's destiny is out of their hands. They are the top-rated team in that group based on FIFA ranking and just, player recognition, overall performance. I probably should have taken them out, but it's an even group. Nigeria has the best talent, so they could still do it. They just need some help along the way. Next, Ivory Coast, Tunisia, and Cameroon. Tunisia's in the best position of these 3. They're looking pretty good. Cameroon's in a tight battle with Cape Verde, and Ivory Coast in a tight battle with Gabon. For now, I'll bet on the proven teams. Again, the other teams got to show it that they can do it before I move these teams that have historical qualification out of pot 3 or out of automatic qualification. Last is Qatar. They're in a qualifying group at home against UAE and Oman, so I do feel that they are the favorites. All right, on to pot 4. We actually know quite a bit about pot 4, especially for this exercise, looking at what the draw will look like. We don't really need to know the teams that are in those playoffs. We just need to say, you'll draw a playoff winner. Anyways, certainly in pot 4 are the 4 Euro playoff winners, 1, 2, 3, and 4. The Intercontinental playoff winners, 1 and 2. And then we feel pretty certain about New Zealand. They've already qualified, but they have a very low FIFA ranking and would need a lot of upsets in CONCACAF and Africa to move into pot 3. So basically, even if there are upsets, those teams will still have better FIFA rankings than New Zealand. We're also we have Jamaica in here, right? That's really just the CONCACAF Group B winners. They're also in that group with Curacao and Trinidad, but they have even lower rankings than Jamaica, so they'll stay here. Jordan already qualified, first time, but low FIFA ranking, not as bad as New Zealand, but unlikely to move up. Then we have AFC Group B, so Asia Group B. Right now I'm calling that Saudi Arabia, again, because they are the home team. They have the experience, but possibly Iraq could pull the upset there. And they are both low enough to remain in pot 4. Lastly, we have Uzbekistan, who has qualified. I think they'll stay in pot 4 because even if teams ahead of them do not qualify, it's likely the teams that take those spots will still have a higher ranking than Uzbekistan. For example, Slovenia, Greece, Norway, even South Africa. If they win, they will likely be ahead in ranking of Uzbekistan. And for the last one, I'm putting Mali, Ghana here. Mali have a better ranking than Ghana, but Ghana are surprisingly low ranked. They are currently in first place in their group and have a 6-point lead over Mali. They play each other once. So I guess with that info, Ghana, who is below Uzbekistan, could give Uzbekistan a more of a chance to move to pot 3. So if Ghana doesn't choke, Uzbekistan would only need 1 upset from Africa, CONCACAF, or Asia to move up. But these are the pots we're going with now. Obviously, there's many assumptions here. As I said, 1 or 2 teams not winning their groups of qualifying changes a lot of things downstream. If you're looking at who's most susceptible, aside from Nigeria and Italy, who I already mentioned, I'd say Ivory Coast potentially losing to Gabon, Austria losing to Bosnia, and Switzerland to Sweden. And maybe the biggest tidal wave, the biggest upset could be Belgium moving or not winning and thus changing everything from all the way up to pot 1. Potentially they could lose out to Wales. Not likely, but possible and fun to think about what would happen if Belgium do not make automatic qualification for World Cup. So those are the groups. Something's likely to change, but even with uncertainties, we can look at the possible types of draws for the U.S. I'm not going to do a mock draw or a draw simulator, or even look at the ideal group or group of death. Instead, I'll just be looking at the possibilities with a bunch of if-then statements. If the U.S. draws a South America team, then how likely is it? What is likely to happen in the next pot? It will make the most sense when talking about non-European teams because there are actual constraints and fewer teams. So if we say we could draw an Asian team in pot 3, there's only 2 of them. If we say a South American team in pot 3, there's only 2 of them, so it gives us a better idea of who exactly we're talking about. All right, looking at these pots, let's just take a look at what our options are. So the best place to start is the most likely scenario. As a non-European team in pot 1, it's likely that the U.S. will draw a European team in pot 2. Right now, that's Croatia, Italy, Switzerland, Denmark, and Austria, but it could potentially be Switzerland, Denmark, Norway, Wales. So maybe I'm wrong to say that upsets are good for the U.S. national team. As I said before, if we go with the seeded teams, so the teams already in pot 2, I would say Switzerland, Denmark, and Austria seem the most likely. The worst option would be Italy, but getting the European team, even if it's Italy, prevents the U.S. from getting Colombia or Uruguay, which I think is a definite positive. In this scenario, the U.S. getting a European team from pot 2, pot 3 is pretty open. The only teams barred from the U.S. would be the CONCACAF teams, Panama and Costa Rica. If Ecuador stay in pot 3, they'd be the one to avoid. The most likely option in pot 3 would be an African team, just based on the number of African teams in pot 3. It's half the pot. So let's play that out a bit. If pot 3 is an African team, let's just say Ivory Coast, then pot 4 would be limited to Asian teams, New Zealand, the Intercontinental Playoff without CONCACAF and African teams, if that exists, and then, because right now there's only one European team, potentially the Euro teams as well. Yeah, so just sort of do a scenario. Let's just say U.S. draws Switzerland in pot 2, Ivory Coast in pot 3, and then an Asian team, Saudi Arabia, in pot 4. That's a pretty sweet group. With the European team in pot 2, if not an African team in pot 3, how about an Asian team? Then that would change the pot 4 options to New Zealand, any of the African teams that are there, the Intercontinental Playoff without Asia or CONCACAF, and the European playoff teams. So that could be the USA, Switzerland in pot 2. Let's say the Asian team is Qatar in pot 3, and a Euro playoff team in pot 4, which really could be anything. Let's just say Sweden. I do think that's tougher than what we just talked about, but maybe not. Maybe it's pretty similar. And the other option would be, potentially worst option would be a South American team in pot 3. So again, USA, Switzerland, Paraguay, worst, Ecuador, and a Euro playoff team. So yeah, that's the scenarios if we think pot 2 will be Europe. If they force the U.S. to draw a European team, that's a possibility, or just 5 out of 12. Those are pretty good odds, even if it's not forced. But let's look at the other options. What happens if the U.S. doesn't get a European team? It could be a South American team, and right now in pot 2, that's Colombia and Uruguay. And then because they wouldn't have a European team in pot 2, they would be forced to get a Euro playoff team from pot 4. So that option would be USA, Colombia, let's say, and then pot 3 would be Asian team or African team. Let's just go with Ivory Coast again, and the Euro playoff, who we already said could be Italy, could be Belgium, could be Croatia, could be Sweden, could be Slovenia, could be Montenegro. A lot of things could happen there. So maybe better to get that European team in the second pot. But we don't really know that yet, not knowing the Euro playoff teams, because as I just said, they could be someone really good. Yeah, so here's the options I just came up with. Slightly different, but again, this is if option one would be drawing a UEFA team in pot two. So basically, that first draw is the biggest one for what will happen later on, which makes sense. The more information you know, the easier it is to extrapolate the possibilities of the future. So yeah, we just said, as we said, most likely US, UEFA, Africa, and Euro playoff. Other option would be USA, UEFA, Asia, Euro playoff, or USA, UEFA, South America, Euro playoff. And the other option, if we keep going, any of the options above, and move the Euro playoff out and get New Zealand instead, that would be more favorable. And also, the last option would be if we don't get Asia in pot three, then also that pot four has the possibility of Asia. So it could be Asia, New Zealand, or the Euro playoff spot. Got that? Then option two, what we kind of just talked about, that tougher one, would be the U.S. drawing South American team in pot two. So USA, South America, that means Uruguay or Colombia. Most likely then, as we said before, it would be Africa, let's just say Egypt. And in this scenario, they're forced to get a Euro team because they'll need at least one European team in the group. Second option there would be USA, South America, and Asia instead of Africa, but still Euro playoff. Option three would be to draw an Asian team in pot two. So possibility there would be USA, Japan, and then again Africa, most likely in pot three. Because no Asian teams allowed, that would mean only Africa and South America would be the options in pot three. And again, because no European team in pot two, we'd be forced to get a Euro team in pot four. So two options there, either South America or Africa in pot two if the US draws an Asian team. So you can see some things just based on the first draw would be pretty set. Options would be quite limited if the US drew an Asian team in pot two. Next option would be, again, pretty similar, African team in pot two. So that would be Morocco or Senegal. Let's just say Morocco. Then the option would be South America or Asia in pot three because they can't draw another African team. So option 4A, USA, Morocco, Paraguay, Euro playoff. 4B, USA, Morocco, Qatar, Euro playoff. So those are really all the options. Most likely option, European team pot two, African team pot four, and then a 50-50 chance on pot four being a Euro playoff team or Asia, New Zealand. I'd say the worst option would be USA, and then pot two, Croatia, so no upsets in pot one. The second pot would be, I'd say probably the worst would be Ecuador, and then getting a Euro playoff team, and that playoff team being Italy. Switzerland also a bad option. But yeah, USA, Croatia, Ecuador, Italy, that would be quite a bad draw for the home team. And of course, this is not meaningless, but if teams that we think are going to make it don't make it, that makes this much more of a conjecture. So if Belgium doesn't win their group, everyone behind them moves up. If Costa Rica or Panama don't make it, pot three looks totally different. And the pot four options for the U.S. are different because there's more CONCACAF teams there now. If Switzerland doesn't make it, all my projections are out the window, sort of. But yeah, just kidding there. This is informative for how the draw works, but more so meant to be fun. So enjoy your day out there dreaming of a U.S. group with Austria, Qatar, and New Zealand. We're gonna win the World Cup.